She called it a housewarming gift. That's what my daughter-in-law said when she handed me the candle. A big, heavy thing in a dark amber jar, the kind you see displayed on the counter at those fancy home stores in the mall. It smelled like cedar and sandalwood when I lifted the lid. Real nice. I thanked her, set it on the mantel in my study, and didn't think another thing about it. That was the week after I turned 63. I want to be clear about something before I go any further. I didn't have enemies. I wasn't a difficult man. I'd spent 31 years as a civil engineer for the county, kept my head down, did good work, and retired without a single serious dispute I could name. My wife Carol passed from ovarian cancer 11 years ago, and after that it was just me and the house and the routine I'd built around missing her. My son Liam had grown into a decent man, or so I believed. He worked in commercial real estate in Charlotte, drove a nice truck, called on Sundays most of the time. When he married Serena 4 years ago, I was happy for him. She was polished, put together, spoke in that careful way people do when they've been taught to make good impressions. I noticed she never asked about Carol, never wanted to see the photos on the shelf in the hallway, but I told myself that was just her personality. Some people aren't sentimental. That doesn't make them bad. I should have paid more attention to what it does make them. The study was my room. After Carol died, I moved my reading chair in there, put up the shelves I'd always wanted, and made it the one space in the house that was entirely mine. I spent most evenings in that room, reading mostly. Sometimes watching game film from the old Carolina Panthers seasons I'd recorded years back. I had a small space heater in the corner and a ceiling fan I ran slow even in winter because I liked a little air moving. The candle sat on the mantel and I burned it most evenings. Serena had given it to me in October, and by Thanksgiving I was starting to feel off. I didn't connect the two things. Why would I? It started with headaches. Not the sharp kind that grab your attention. The slow spreading kind that sit behind your eyes and make everything feel slightly wrong. I figured it was my blood pressure. I'd been borderline high for a few years, and my doctor, a methodical man named Dr. Alderton over at the Piedmont Clinic, had been nudging me toward medication I kept putting off. I made an appointment. He ran the standard panel, checked my pressure, reviewed everything, said I looked fine. Told me to cut back on sodium and take a baby aspirin. I did both. The headaches didn't stop. By December, I was tired in a way I hadn't been since the worst months after Carol died. That bone-deep exhaustion that doesn't go away with sleep. I'd wake up after 8 hours feeling like I hadn't rested at all. I started skipping my morning walks, which I'd done every day for 6 years without interruption. My neighbor Gerald noticed. He's in his mid-70s and walks his beagle along the same route every morning. One Tuesday, he knocked on my door and asked if I was all right, because he hadn't seen me in 2 weeks. I told him I was just a little under the weather, but I was losing weight. Not the kind you planned for, the kind that makes your belt feel strange and your face look different in the mirror. I hadn't changed what I was eating. If anything, I was eating more because I was home more. My jeans stopped fitting. My collars got loose. By the time Liam and Serena came for Christmas dinner, I dropped close to 15 pounds since October. Liam looked at me across the table and said, "Dad, you look thin." Serena looked at me too, and the thing I've thought about 1,000 times since is what I saw on her face in that moment. It wasn't concern. It was something else, something that looked more like assessment, like she was noting something on a list. She asked if I'd been using the candle, said she'd noticed it on the mantel when she came in and she was glad I liked it. I said yes, I burned it almost every night. She smiled and said she'd bring me another one when this one ran out. I didn't sleep well that night, not because I was suspicious. I wasn't, not yet. But because my stomach had been wrong all through dinner, and I lay in bed listening to the space heater and wondering how a man who used to work 60-hour weeks and hike the Blue Ridge Parkway every spring could feel this hollow at 63. January came and I went back to Dr. Alderton. This time I told him everything. The fatigue, the weight loss, the headaches, the way my hands sometimes went slightly numb in the mornings. He was thorough. I'll give him that. He ran a full metabolic panel, a thyroid screen, checked for diabetes, checked my cortisol levels, sent me for a chest x-ray, called me 3 days later and said everything looked normal. Normal. I sat in my kitchen after that phone call and stared at the wall for a long time. I was not a man who frightened easily. I'd had hard years. I knew what grief felt like, what real tiredness felt like, what it meant to push through something difficult. But there was something about feeling sick without a name for it that hollowed me out in a different way. I started keeping a notebook. I wrote down what I ate, when I slept, when the headaches came, when they let up. I was trying to find a pattern, something I could point to and say, there. February was bad. I developed a cough that came and went without reason. My eyes started bothering me, a low-grade irritation I couldn't explain. I went back to the doctor and he referred me to a specialist over in Concord, an internist who ran another round of tests and found nothing remarkable. He suggested it might be anxiety, that the transition out of a long career sometimes took a physical toll men didn't expect. I was not anxious. I was sick. There's a difference. Liam called every Sunday, and every Sunday he asked the same question, not how are you feeling, or are you eating better, or have the doctors figured anything out. He asked, you still spending time in the study? I said yes. He said he was glad I had my space. I didn't think about it then, but I've thought about it every day since. The candle was 3/4 gone by the time any of this started to make sense. It happened the way most important things happen, sideways without warning because of something unrelated. In late February, I went out to Hartfield's, an antique and restoration shop on a county road about 12 miles from my house. I'd been going there for years, mostly to browse. The owner, a man named Exad, had run the place for going on 30 years. He was the kind of man who fixed things because he genuinely believed broken things deserved to be fixed. He repaired clocks, refinished furniture, restored old lamps. I'd had him fix a mantel clock of Carol's years back. We had a comfortable kind of acquaintance, the sort where you don't talk much, but what you say means something. I'd brought him an old table lamp I'd found in the garage, Carol's mother's originally. I wanted the wiring checked and the base repolished. He was at his workbench when I came in, glasses pushed up on his forehead, turning something small in his hands. He looked up, nodded, and then looked at me the way people had started looking at me. That second, longer look, that told me I wasn't hiding it as well as I thought. "You're not well," he said, not as a question. "Going through something," I said. "Doctors can't figure it out." He set down what he was working on. He's a quiet man, Dex. He doesn't fill silence with noise. He asked me what the symptoms were, and I told him, because I was tired of not telling people. Tired of saying I was fine when I wasn't. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment, and then he said, "You burning anything at home? Candles, incense, anything like that?" I said yes, a candle, in the room where I spent most of my evenings. He asked me to describe it. I told him about the amber jar, the cedar and sandalwood smell, the way it burned slow and even. He asked who had given it to me. I told him my daughter-in-law. He was quiet again in a way that was different from his regular quiet. He took his glasses off and set them on the bench. "I don't want to alarm you," he said, "but I've been reading about some incidents, things that have come up in restoration work, in old buildings, in poorly ventilated spaces. Some candles, especially if they're not commercially manufactured or if someone's added something to them, can release compounds when burned, metallic compounds, in an enclosed space over a long period of time. He paused. You said you keep a space heater in that room? I said yes. And you're in there most evenings, windows closed in winter? Yes. He looked at me steadily. I think before you burn that thing again, you should have someone look at it. A lab, environmental health service, someone who can test the wax. He leaned forward. And I think you should stop burning it tonight. Not tomorrow. Tonight. I drove home and took the candle off the mantle and put it in the garage. I stood in my study for a long time after. The room smelled like it always did. Wood smoke from the fireplace, old books, the faint cedar that had worked its way into everything. I opened the window for the first time in months and let the cold February air come through, and I just stood there breathing it. That night I slept for 10 hours and woke up with the first clear head I'd had since October. I knew, in the way you know things before you can prove them, what had happened. But knowing and proving are different things, and I am an engineer. I needed the data. I called the Mecklenburg County Environmental Health Line on a Monday morning and explained what I had. The woman I spoke with was professional and brisk and told me to bring the candle in for testing, to handle it with gloves if possible, and to bring any packaging it came with. I brought it in Tuesday. They told me results would take 7 to 10 business days. Those were a long 10 days. I didn't tell Liam. I didn't tell anyone. I went about my routine. I started taking my walks again, slowly at first, around the block twice, then 3 times. I ate what I could. I sat in the study but left the window cracked, and I didn't light a single candle, didn't burn a thing. By the end of that week, I was noticeably better. The headaches were coming less often. The exhaustion was still there, but had shifted from crushing to manageable. I was starting to feel like myself in a way I hadn't in 4 months. That made it worse, in a sense. Feeling better meant I was right, and being right meant what I feared most was true. The environmental health office called on a Thursday afternoon. The woman I'd spoken with before asked if she could transfer me to her supervisor. The supervisor, a careful-voiced man named Mr. Dubown. Prescott told me that the candle had tested positive for elevated levels of a metallic compound. He used a technical term I wrote down but won't repeat here, that in sustained, enclosed space exposure could cause the precise symptoms I had described: headaches, fatigue, weight loss, respiratory irritation. He said the levels were not accidental, that the concentration in the wax was well above anything that would appear in a commercially manufactured product, that in his professional assessment, it had been added deliberately. He asked if I had any idea how it came to be in my possession. I told him yes. He said he would need to refer the matter to the county health department and that I should also contact the Mecklenburg County Sheriff's Office. He said it in the measured way of a man who had been trained to say difficult things without inflection. I thanked him, set the phone down, and sat at my kitchen table for a long time. Outside the window, the maple in the backyard was just beginning to show the first faint blush of early buds. February going to March, I'd planted that tree the year Liam was born. 32 years ago, I'd stood in the yard with Carol, and we'd staked it when it was barely 4 feet tall, a wispy little thing that looked like it might not make it through its first winter. It made it, it got big and strong, and it was still there. I thought about what it meant to be someone's father, what it cost, what you believed about your child that you had no evidence for except love, and the years you'd spent together, and how long you could hold that belief against the weight of what was right in front of you. Then I picked up the phone and called the sheriff's department. What came out over the next several weeks was not simple, and I won't pretend it was. When investigators looked into Serena's background, they found things. a previous marriage that had ended under circumstances her first husband had never fully explained. A pattern of behavior in that relationship that, when described to me by a detective named Kowalski, made my stomach turn. She had also, it emerged, recently increased the beneficiary amount on a life insurance policy I'd carried for 20 years. She had managed to get herself added years back through Liam at a time when I'd been less careful about such things than I should have been. The bolt slid shut on the other side on the door. I had no mortgage. The house had been paid off for 8 years. My pension from the county and Carol's small life insurance payout had left me comfortable. Not wealthy by any standard, but solid. The kind of solid that looks like a lot of money to someone who has been calculating it. Liam. This is the part I still can't fully talk about without the words going strange in my mouth. The investigation found text messages on Serena's phone. Conversations with my son in which she had described her plan in terms I won't repeat here, where she had reassured him that it would look natural, where he had asked more than once if she was sure it wouldn't be traced back. He had known from the beginning. Every Sunday phone call, every time he asked if I was still spending time in my study. He had known what was in that room. He had known what she was doing to me, slow and patient, winter by winter. I don't know what to say about that. That doesn't sound like something from a movie, like something that happens to someone else. But it happened to me, and I have to live in it, and the only honest thing I can tell you is that the grief of it is not simple. It's not clean. You don't stop loving your child because you find out he tried to have you killed. The love doesn't disappear. It just becomes something else. Something that doesn't have a name. Something that sits in your chest like a stone you carry everywhere and can't put down. Serena was charged with criminal poisoning, conspiracy to commit murder, and fraud. Liam was charged as a co-conspirator. Their attorneys tried to negotiate. The prosecutor, a focused woman who had done this for 20 years, was not interested in negotiating. She told me in the straightforward way I appreciated that she intended to take this to trial and that she expected both of them to receive significant sentences. The trial was in September. Liam sat at the defense table and he looked at me once, on the second day, and I looked back at him. I don't know what either of us was trying to say. Some things don't translate into anything you can name. Serena received 14 years. Liam received 11. I was not relieved exactly. I was not satisfied exactly. I don't have a clean word for what I felt when the verdicts came down. I sat in that courtroom and I thought about the maple tree in my backyard and the October afternoon she'd handed me that candle, and I'd lifted the lid and smelled the cedar and sandalwood and thought, what a nice thing to do. I go to a counselor now, Dr. Yates, in a small practice off Providence Road. She has a very direct way of asking questions and a very patient way of waiting for the answer. I wasn't sure about counseling at first. I'm from a generation of men who were not raised to sit in a room and talk about what hurts. But I go twice a month and it helps. Not in a dramatic way. In the quiet way that things help when you give them time. I still have the house. I still have the study. I had it repainted in the spring, a warmer color than the previous gray, and I got rid of the old space heater and bought a proper wood-burning insert for the fireplace. The mantel where the candle sat is empty now. I like it empty. I put Carol's old mantel clock back in its place, and I let Dex restore it properly. He'd offered years ago, and I'd kept putting it off, the way you put off things that feel too final. He did a beautiful job. It keeps perfect time. Dex is the reason I'm alive. I've said that to him, and he does what he always does, which is get quiet for a moment and then say something practical about the work in front of him. He's not a man who takes compliments easily. But I mean it. A man I'd known for years across a workbench, who wasn't my doctor or my family or anyone whose job it was to take care of me. He saw something wrong, asked the right questions, and told me the truth. Pay attention to the people in your life who do that, who tell you the truth without an angle, without benefit to themselves, just because they see something and they can't let it go. That's a rare thing. I turned 64 last October. My neighbor Gerald came over and we had grilled chicken on the back deck and watched the light go down through the trees. His beagle fell asleep under my chair. I had a glass of sweet tea and I sat there in that good ordinary quiet and I thought about how close I'd come to not being there at all. I thought about the stone in my chest and how it was still there and probably always would be. And I thought about that maple tree out front, still standing, still adding rings, making it through another winter the same way it always had. That's enough. That for now is enough. I keep coming back to the maple tree out front, the one I planted the year Liam was born. 32 years of rings inside that trunk, each one added quietly, without asking for anything. I think about that a lot now, how the things that last are the ones that just keep going. Not dramatic about it, not asking to be noticed, just there, adding another ring, making it through another winter. What happened to me was not complicated when you strip it down. Serena made a calculation. She looked at my house, my pension, my policy, and she decided that my life was worth less than what she could collect from it. She brought my own son into that calculation, and he agreed to it. That's the part that still catches in my throat. Not what she did. She was never mine to trust. But Liam was, and he chose something over me that I still don't have a clean word for. I've thought about the choices that led to where I ended up, both the bad ones and the ones that saved me. Serena chose greed over conscience, and I believe a person pays for that. Not in some cosmic storybook way, but in the most practical sense. You cannot build a life on what you took from someone else. The structure doesn't hold. She is serving 14 years now, and whatever she thought she was going to have is gone. That is not revenge. That is just consequence, moving at its own pace. What I've had to sit with is the question of what I could have seen sooner. I was not a careless man, but I was a trusting one, and I let that trust operate on autopilot in places where I should have been paying closer attention. The signs were there. The way she never asked about Carol, the way she always circled back to the house, the policy, what I planned to do with things when I was gone. I filed those observations in a drawer and left them there, because the alternative, believing what they pointed to, was too uncomfortable to look at directly. That was not wisdom. That was avoidance wearing the mask of generosity. I know the difference now. And then there's Dex, a man at a workbench in an antique shop on a county road who didn't have to say a single word. He could have polished my lamp and sent me home and stayed out of it entirely. Nobody would have faulted him, but he saw something wrong and he couldn't let it sit there. That kind of integrity, the kind that acts without benefit, without being asked, just because the right thing is visible and you can't pretend otherwise, that's not common. When you find it in anyone, in any form, pay attention to it. It is one of the rarest things a person can offer another person. I'm still here because of 3 things, as I figure it. Dex's honesty, my own stubbornness about keeping that notebook, tracking what was happening, refusing to accept that being sick without a diagnosis was just something to accept, and the plain durability of a life that, despite everything, still had things worth getting back to. The morning walks, Gerald's beagle under my chair, the clock ticking on the mantel the way it did when Carol was alive. Those aren't dramatic things, but they're real, and real is what holds when everything else falls away. If you're watching this and something feels wrong, in your health, in your home, in a relationship you've been too loyal to examine clearly, don't file it in a drawer. You don't have to assume the worst, but you owe yourself the honesty of looking. The people who love you, truly love you, will not be threatened by that, and the ones who are threatened by it will tell you something important. That maple is still up front, still adding rings, so am I.